Petropavlovsk served as the flagship of a trio of pre-dreadnought battleships built for the Imperial Russian Navy during the final decade of the 19th century. Based on the battleship Imperator Nikolai I, the Petropavlovsk-class vessels were significantly expanded to carry an armament of 4 12-inch and 8 8-inch guns. During construction, however, their armament was revised to feature more powerful, high-velocity 12-inch guns, with the 8-inch guns replaced by 12 6-inch guns. The ships measured 376 feet or 114.6 meters overall in length, had a beam of 70 feet or 21.3 meters, and a draft of 28 feet 3 inches or 8.6 meters. Although designed to displace 11,140 tons, Petropavlovsk came in nearly 410 tons overweight, ultimately displacing 11,536 tons when completed. The vessel was propelled by 2 vertical triple expansion steam engines manufactured by the British firm Hawthorne Leslie, each powering a single shaft with steam provided by 14 cylindrical boilers. Rated at 10,600 indicated horsepower and engineered to achieve a top speed of 16 knots, Petropavlovsk, however, reached 16.38 knots from 11,255 indicated horsepower during her sea trials. She carried enough coal to yield a range of 3,750 nautical miles at a speed of 10 knots. Her crew totaled 725 men when she served as a flagship. The main battery's 4 12-inch guns were arranged in 2 twin-gun turrets, one positioned forward and the other aft of the superstructure. Although engineered to fire 1 round every 90 seconds, the effective rate was only half as rapid. The secondary armament comprised 12 Kanay 6-inch quick-firing guns. 8 of these were installed in 4 twin-gun wing turrets, while the remaining guns were set in unprotected embrasures along the hull amidships. For protection against torpedo boats, smaller guns were also carried. A dozen quick-firing 47mm Hotchkiss guns and 28 Maxim quick-firing 37mm guns. Additionally, the vessel was equipped with 6 torpedo tubes featuring 4 15-inch tubes above water and 2 18-inch submerged tubes, all mounted on the broadside. The ship also carried 50 mines intended for anchorage protection. Russian producers of the nickel-steel armor used in Petropavlovsk were unable to meet demand, so her armor was sourced from Bethlehem Steel in the United States. Her waterline belt was 12 to 16 inches, 305 to 406 millimeters thick. The main gun turrets featured a maximum thickness of 10 inches or 254 millimeters, while her deck armor varied from 2 to 3 inches or 51 to 76 millimeters in thickness. Petropavlovsk was named in recognition of the victorious Russian defense during the 1854 siege of Petropavlovsk. Hampered by a shortage of skilled labor, design modifications, and delayed delivery of the primary armament, construction spanned 6 years. She was laid down on May 19, 1892, alongside her 2 sister ships at the Galerny Island shipyard and launched on November 9, 1894. Her trials ran from 1898 to 1899, after which she was ordered to proceed to the Far East. Petropavlovsk departed Kronstadt on October 17 and reached Port Arthur on May 10, 1900, serving as the flagship of Vice Admiral Nikolai Skridlov and the 1st Pacific Squadron. In mid-1900, the ship helped quash the Boxer Rebellion in China. In February 1902, Vice Admiral Oscar Stark succeeded Skridlov in command of the squadron and hoisted his flag on Petropavlovsk. That year, a radio was installed on board the vessel. Following Japan's triumph in the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895, both Russia and Japan set their sights on controlling Manchuria and Korea, which in turn escalated tensions between the two nations. In 1901, Japan initiated negotiations to alleviate these pressures, yet the Russian government replied slowly and with uncertainty, as it had not yet determined a definitive solution to the disputes. Japan perceived this as calculated delay intended to secure additional time to complete Russia's armament initiatives. The situation was further aggravated by Russia's failure to withdraw its troops from Manchuria in October 1903 as promised. The final triggers were the report of Russian timber concessions in northern Korea and Russia's refusal to recognize Japanese interests in Manchuria while continuing to impose conditions on Japanese operations in Korea. These moves led the Japanese government in December 1903 to conclude that war was unavoidable. As tensions with Japan escalated, the Pacific Squadron began mooring in the outer harbor at night to respond more swiftly to any Japanese attempt to land troops in Korea. During the night of February 8, 1904, the Imperial Japanese Navy executed a surprise assault on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur. Petropavlovsk remained unharmed and sailed the following morning when the Japanese combined fleet, under the command of Vice Admiral Togo Heihachiro, engaged. Togo had predicted that his ship's nocturnal attack would be far more effective than it turned out to be, and he anticipated that the Russians would be significantly disorganized and weakened. However, they recovered swiftly from their initial shock and were prepared for his assault. The Japanese vessels were detected by the protected cruiser Boyarin, which was patrolling offshore and subsequently alerted the Russian defenses. Togo opted to strike the Russian coastal defenses with his primary armament while engaging the ships with his secondary batteries. Dividing his fire turned out to be an unwise choice, as the Japanese 8- and 6-inch guns inflicted minimal damage on the Russian vessels, which focused all their fire on the Japanese ships with moderate effect. Petropavlovsk sustained light damage during the engagement from 1 6-inch and 2 12-inch shells, resulting in 2 fatalities and 5 injuries. In response, she fired 20 12-inch and 68 6-inch shells at the Japanese battleships, yet none hit. Unsatisfied with the performance of the 1st Pacific Squadron, the Naval Ministry replaced Stark with the dynamic and aggressive Vice Admiral Stepan Makarov, widely regarded as the Navy's most competent admiral, on the 7th of March. Due to the damage sustained during the attack by the more heavily armored Cesarevich and the ensuing extended repair period, Makarov was forced to retain Petropavlovsk as his flagship, against his better judgment. Failing to blockade or trap the Russian squadron at Port Arthur by sinking block ships in the harbor's channel, Togo devised a new strategy. His plan involved having ships mine the harbor entrance and then lure the Russians into the minefield in hopes of sinking several Russian warships. Under the cover of 4 detachments of torpedo boat destroyers, the minelayer Korumaru began laying a minefield near Port Arthur's entrance on the night of the 31st of March. Makarov observed the Japanese vessels, mistakenly believing they were the Russian destroyers he had ordered to patrol that area. Early in the morning of the 13th of April, while still in darkness and heavy fog, the Russian destroyer Strashny encountered 4 Japanese destroyers on patrol. Once her captain quickly realized his error, the Russian vessel attempted to flee but was unsuccessful after a Japanese shell struck one of her torpedoes, triggering its detonation. By that time, the armored cruiser Bayan had sortied to lend support. Yet it managed to rescue only 5 survivors before a Japanese squadron of protected cruisers attacked. Accompanied by 3 protected cruisers, Makarov steered Petropavlovsk and her sister Poltava out to support Bayan while instructing the remainder of the 1st Pacific Squadron to follow as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the Japanese had informed Togo of the Russian sortie, and he arrived with all 6 Japanese battleships. Facing overwhelming odds, Makarov ordered his ships to retreat and join the rest of the squadron that was just leaving the harbor. After the squadron had regrouped and turned back toward the enemy, about 2 nautical miles from shore, Petropavlovsk struck one or more mines at 9:42 a.m. and sank almost immediately, claiming 27 officers and 652 enlisted men, including Makarov and the war artist Vasily Vereshchagin. 7 officers and 73 men were rescued. Makarov's arrival had lifted the squadron's morale, while his death left the sailors and their officers disheartened. His successor, Rear Admiral Wilhelm Wittgeft, was a career staff officer ill-suited to command a navy at war. He did not regard himself as a distinguished leader, and his lack of charisma and inactive style did nothing to revive the squadron's spirit. A monument was erected in St. Petersburg in 1913 to honor Makarov after Japanese divers located his remains within the wreck of Petropavlovsk and conducted a burial at sea.